this is the closest thing I have to a crystal skull. So he's gonna be our little companion prop for the video. Just imagine he's a crystal skull. Okay, so the quick answer is yes, but no. It's not all bad. There's a lot of really good stuff in it. It just kind of takes a hard turn in the second half of the movie. And that's the bad stuff that you're remembering. So let's talk about it. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is notoriously bad. It is known for being just a god-awful movie. And you know what? A lot of that criticism is very fair. But I rewatched it recently because I was working on a video for the main channel, and I went to watch the newest Indiana Jones movie, and I was like, I might as well rewatch Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because I haven't watched it since I watched it in theaters as a kid. And I feel like that clouds your judgment of all that you remember is you're watching it as a 2008, so I would have been like 10 years old. Then the internet for the past nearly 2 decades saying it's shit. So I thought it was fair to revisit it. And throughout a good chunk of this movie, and there's multiple times in my notes where I'm just like, why did this movie get lambasted as hard as it did? Because it doesn't seem that bad. And the truth is, a lot of it is decent. So one of the big things at the start of the movie that got memed on super hard back then was Indiana Jones getting in a fridge and being blasted super far and using that to survive a nuke. It is ridiculous, but it is fun. And there's other stuff in the Indiana Jones movies that are like, that's a bit silly, that's a bit outlandish. But I do agree with people, even within the Indiana Jones movie logic, that one was pretty far. But it does kind of match up with the level of logic that the movie just as a whole uses. And it's very mid-2000s family adventure movie logic instead of 1980s action adventure movie logic. Because yeah, your 80s action adventure movies are outlandish, but still grounded in reality. But yeah, think about the early 2000s, where particularly a lot of filmmakers are exploring how they can use CGI to do larger than life stuff. Think like Spy Kids, right? And the sense of wonder that is trying to evoke in kids to get them excited about the movie. And I think Spy Kids is a great example because they do it really well. Particularly the first movie is grounded in reality, but in kid reality, right? It follows kid logic of that could work. And for that movie, it does work. The issue being that the Indiana Jones franchise has never really followed kid logic. It's always followed real world adult logic, even if that's not necessarily realistic, but you can follow along. But Kingdom of the Crystal Skull uses that early 2000s kids logic for a lot of stuff. But that only really starts coming up in the second half of the movie, so we'll talk about that in a bit. So let's talk about the first half of the movie, because that is the one that I feel like actually feels like a pretty typical Indiana Jones movie. Definitely that opening scene where we've got Indiana Jones in Area 51, and there's a lot of CGI stuff that you're like, okay, this takes me out of it. And I think that's the biggest thing that people remember of a lot of bad CGI in this movie. And they're right, there is. Like the sky replacements in this scene, really obvious, really take you out of it. There's this like digital fake softness added to a lot of stuff that just doesn't look right. Bear in mind that a lot of this movie is going to have a lot of that sort of stuff. But once we get inside this Area 51 warehouse, I feel like this is a very traditional Indiana Jones moment. He's in a situation where he can't really get out of it just yet, so he's got to cooperate with the bad guys. This happens in literally every Indiana Jones movie. And so they find the super magnetized alien crate thing, which is really weird. And I think that's the first part that really deviates from the traditional Indiana Jones formula. See, the traditional Indiana Jones formula has relied on a combination of historical and religious artifacts, things that are very grounded in what we accept as reality. That's not to say that aliens aren't real, although they are, but I think that when you're talking about a historical action adventure movie, more people are going to accept the base reality that a lot of the stuff in the Bible is maybe not fiction, like the Ark of the Covenant, shoot in holy laser beams. And yeah, it's very Christian centric, but generally the basis for the movies has worked. You've got Indiana Jones as the cynic, doesn't really believe in it, and then gets disproven later on in the movie of like, oh, this historical artifact might also be an actual religious artifact of power. And I think, yeah, when that's your expectation out of an Indiana Jones movie, and then you're immediately slapped with aliens are real, I can understand how you lose people. I was on board personally, but I get why people will be skeptical. So then, yeah, we've got that whole escape sequence. I think that's a lot of fun. Getting to the nuclear bomb testing ground, he goes into the living room and he goes over to the couch.
Hey, I knocked. You guys got a phone.
And then realizes that's a fun moment. I do really like the nuclear testing ground scene. I think it's pretty good. I don't think the fridge is the worst of this movie's sins. Editor Josh, don't put the cinema sins ding.
Let's not forget, even if he's...
One of the things I actually really hate about this opening scene, Cate Blanchett's Ukrainian accent is not great.
I know them before anyone else. And what I do not know, I find out.
Particularly in this first scene, it seems to slip a lot. Throughout the rest of the movie, not so much. Or maybe I just, accepted it and stopped noticing. So then after that, we're back to, again, hitting a lot of the traditional Indiana Jones beats. He's at the university, gets pulled aside because the CIA are investigating him, and the university can't have that. On his way out, meets who we know now is his son, Shia LaBeouf. Some guy that was like, oh yeah, my dad is friends with you, and my mom said to go find you to help out. And generally, I actually think Shia LaBeouf is one of the good parts of this movie. But yeah, so then Indy and Mutt get to have a little bit of adventure, do a little bit of grave robbing, and this part of the movie so far feels like an Indiana Jones movie. It was shot on film. The cinematographer does mention that he spent a lot of time studying the previous Indiana Jones movies to emulate that style, that feeling, the way that things are lit, the way that things are framed. And that's a damn good job of it. I think the first half of the movie really, really nails that down way better than Dial of Destiny does. Dial of Destiny is very distinctly a James Mangold movie. But go watch that video when that's out. It'll be in the card in the corner or down below. But despite what I was saying about, 2000s kids logic for movies earlier, one thing I really do love is that the crystal skull itself feels so 80s as a physical prop. The way that I'm gonna assume is cast out of resin with like a holographic foil crumpled up inside. I don't know. I'll try and figure that out. But based on my prop making experience, that is how I imagine it would be done. Probably with some more advanced techniques than what I'm imagining, but that's the basic idea. And it looks and feels so 80s. And I think that it helps sell that as part of like the rest of the Indiana Jones universe of logic, I guess. And then something that I do like is that instead of having Nazis as the villain, we have Soviets, which, given that it's set in the Cold War, this makes sense. And particularly pairing it with the skull. The way that Cate Blanchett's character describes the power of the skull, of it being a psychological weapon, being able to inject information into people's brains.
To peer across the world and know the enemy's secrets. To place our thoughts into the minds of your leaders.
It's such a perfect match for a Cold War story of that information war. I really liked that. I definitely did not pick that up. I don't think I knew anything about the Cold War when I was 10 years old. So that's something that rewatching it as an adult, I was like, yeah, that's a good detail. But that scene where they've got Indy captured and they're talking about the skull, they have Indy talking to the professor guy that's gone insane from looking at the skull for too long, played by John Hurt, who John Hurt is criminally underused in this. I was really disappointed by it. Like, he's great, but just being a madman that most of the time just sits there and looks bewildered, it just feels like an underuse for him. But yeah, that scene, tried to escape the camp, and then it's like the middle of the night, and then they go to the day and they're driving. That's where the movie starts to lose me, because this is where it starts to get really CGI heavy. For one, at an hour and 12 minutes, it feels like the sort of vehicle that you would see in Avatar, like James Cameron's Avatar. It's got this big rotating blade, and it follows kids' action-adventure movie logic. And you're going to be seeing a lot of this now. But yeah, this sequence, I think, is where a lot of people were like, hey, what is going on? This sequence where he's fencing with the Soviet general, and he's got one leg on one car, one leg on the other. The idea makes sense. Like, they set up his fencing experience earlier in the movie.
Fancy prep schools teach you how to debate, chess, fencing. And I'm great with a blade. I just think it's a waste of time.
If you weren't paying attention, it was just a throwaway line. But it's nice that came back just to be like, cool, there is context for this. But yes, that looks ridiculous. This leads to the big waterfall sequence. Yeah, that is that's some obvious compositing if I've ever seen it. And then of course, the one that we all remember, the one that I thought was so fucking cool as a kid, the giant ants. I think they're cool still in a Spy Kids way and not in an Indiana Jones way. They do feel a little too ridiculous for an Indiana Jones movie. And actually, before we even get to the ants, while Mutt is fencing between two cars and then he gets caught by a vine, and then he's in the trees with a bunch of monkeys, and then he's a couple of shots later, he's swinging like Tarzan through the trees, and all the monkeys are following him. Don't know what that was about. Even in my notes, I've got exactly what I wrote down while I was watching. It's a lot of the 2000s family movie stuff. Cute animals, so the monkeys, CGI bugs, the giant ants, and some 3D gimmick shots. I forgot about that. It's only really in this sequence. So it's not like, what Spy Kids, going back to that, Spy Kids 3D, where it's like every third shot is something coming towards you, and it's just annoying. No, it was only a handful of shots in this, where there's another one where I think it's like a vine hitting the camera. When they're going over the waterfall, they've got like the water splashing on that in what I would say is a more exaggerated way. Like, you still see that in cinema now, where if you're like near rapid water, they will have water splash onto the camera, because probably actual water splash onto the camera. But no, it's very clearly the digital splash to do the 3D stuff. But outside of this jungle sequence, there's not a lot of it. And I would say this sequence is the biggest. It's the biggest single scene full of CGI sins, as it were. Don't you put the ding anyway. Fuck you. Oh, and then of course it's an Indiana Jones movie. We do have to have concerning racial caricatures. I'm actually trying to think if there was any in the Dial of Destiny. None that jumped out to me. But in this one, it is the Amazon tribe. I didn't write in my notes if they had specified.
Supposedly the Uga tribe were chosen by the gods 7,000 years ago to build a giant city out of solid gold.
The tribal caricature is about as bad as Indians that they have in Temple of Doom. I still think Temple of Doom is probably worse, but this is pretty bad. Going back to my notes, action set pieces in the second half of the movie feel a bit grandiose for Indy, and they do. They feel really, really big in the same way that like Marvel action set pieces can feel big. Didn't really feel like an indie action set piece, which those can still be big too, but they're big in a more grounded way. Running on top of a train started Indiana Jones 5. Really like that sequence. The fight scene, I think it's in Raiders, in front of the plane in the desert, where it's Indy versus this giant, absolutely jacked guy that dies because he ends up in the propeller. That's a sequence that feels big in the context of that movie, but when you compare it to something like this, it's pretty grounded in comparison. All right, but let's start with a positive thing from the third act of the movie. I like that the aliens are set up once they're like inside the temple and all that. I actually think a lot of the stuff, once they get to like the start of the temple until they get to the like really crazy stuff, that middle bit is actually fine. It feels pretty Indiana Jones, and then it goes off the rails again. But I like that it's set up that the aliens are kind of like the archaeologists of Earth. maybe space archaeologists as a whole, but like they've got a bunch of different artifacts from like all over the planet in their little temple. And I thought that was like a cool little idea of, you know, aliens been watching human civilization. You know, it ties in with like a lot of the alien conspiracy theories, like, you know, the pyramids and shit like that. And I think one of the artifacts they specifically point out is from ancient Egypt. So I thought that was fun. Doesn't really redeem what happens next. So then they get to the throne room of the aliens, where, yeah, you've got all the crystal statues, skeletons, because it turns out they're actual alien skeletons, or maybe they're our statues, I don't know. Anyway, with just the one that has a skull missing, which is the crystal skull we've been lugging around. Then when the Soviet lady lights magnetizes to the thing, that shot looks really weird. And then it all starts spinning, and and then John Hurt's character, his mind comes back, and he's like, oh yeah, no, they're not from space. They're interdimensional beings.
What are they, spacemen?
Interdimensional beings, in point of fact.
I don't hate that idea, but I do hate that is the extent of it. There is no further discussion. There's nothing else going on there. It's just like, yeah, no, they're not from space. They're from another dimension. And then one of the last notes I've got in here is Temple Run ass movie, because a lot of this shit does feel very Temple Run. But one of the last shots that we get in this movie is the wind blowing Indy's hat to Mutt's feet, which I thought was like a nice little nod, you know, a nice little tease, little setup. And then Shia LaBeouf's not really been in Hollywood's good books, so I imagine that's kind of where that died. This movie did get me wondering. I was like, what happened to him? Like, I know he disappeared and he just wasn't really in anything, and he was seen as kind of insane, but like, what was actually what was going on? I just did a quick Google, read through like the Wikipedia page and a couple articles. Crystal Skull did horrifically at the box office, as well as the Transformers movie that came out around the same time. I think that's the third one. Both of those did really, really poorly, and then ended up moving to a lot of smaller indie projects, which a lot of, I guess, one-hit wonders end up doing. Like, look at Daniel Radcliffe, right? A lot of the stuff that he's done post Harry Potter is just random art house shit that some of it's really good. I watched Swiss Army Man for the first time a couple of weeks ago. That was fun. This is not what this video is about. As many people do in big money land, LaBeouf ran into a bunch of substance abuse issues. He was quite difficult to work with. He flaked on a lot of projects. And then in 2020, several abuse claims came out. So you can kind of do the math. But that is, I did not mean to rip that page. Oops. That is the extent of my notes on King of Crystal Skull. I really like the first half of this movie. Like I said, up until that like jungle chase sequence, up until the start of that, it feels pretty classically Indiana Jones, minus obviously the fridge nuke thing. And I think that's a good thing. Overall, it felt like a pretty good start. And then you get into CGI hell and all the alien stuff. And I will say it is one of the movies that I feel like it's more focused on the action set pieces than the little bits of storytelling. I feel like with the original trilogy of Indiana Jones movies, there's a good mix, but there's a lot of discovery. You know, like in Raiders, and he's in the little underground thing in Egypt, and he's dusting stuff off and doing archaeology stuff, and you get to do a bit of discovery with Indy. I feel like both of the new movies, both this one, I say new, it's 2008, but Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and The Dial of Destiny, both of those, they're not entirely lacking in it, but they do have less of it than the original trilogy does, and more action set pieces. Overall, actually, I think this one was paced pretty well. It didn't feel like it dragged on too much. There's a couple of scenes that I was like, okay, we get it. But for the most part, it felt like a pretty smooth, seamless viewing experience. Versus with The Dial of Destiny, I did feel like it dragged a little bit more, which is more notable when you have, you know, less of those little story bits in there versus the original ones. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is about the same sort of runtime as the original trilogy. So even though there is more focus on the action, it's less obvious than in the fifth one. But anyway, if you want to watch my video on the Dial of Destiny and why I think a lot of the criticism for it is unfair, go watch that here. Or I was rewatching these while I was working on a main channel video, which is about if you should believe in God or not. Loaded, I know. Go have a look at that if you feel like that's your cup of tea. It's a fun one. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.